Welcome to Commander Central episode 116. And today we are going to be taking a look at listener Chris Dorson's Nicol Bolas the Ravager deck called Bolas Betrayal. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
And after having Chris back for a week, we are now without Chris again.
I believe he is playtesting for a Modern tournament tomorrow.
I think he is, yeah.
Totally give him his competition stuff.
But never fear, he will be back next week.
Yes.
So how are you doing this fine day, Max?
It is Friday. I cannot complain. You can, because you're still in Ohio.
I can. I'm still traveling for work. I have to work tomorrow night, but I haven't had a chance to talk to you since
yesterday.
Since yesterday. So I had to go into the office late last night, and we have like a big kind of parking garage that has an open roof on it for the building, and I was up. I had parked up on the open roof because there was just no other space, and I went to leave last night. It was probably around like 11:30 or almost midnight, and there were some guys shooting a rap video on the roof of the parking garage.
Wait, what? Did you say rap video on the roof of a parking garage?
Yes, they were. They had like their vehicles with like the lights on. They were using that for like lighting, and I had a like radio out, and they were playing the guy's song, and he was like lip syncing along to. And they were like, they're young, like, in their early 20s, and super nice, or because like their cars were in the way of how I need to go up the ramp. And, I came out, and one guy like ran over to me, and he's like, "Hey man, we're going to be like 10 minutes, finish this one shot up. Do you mind waiting?" And I'm like, "No, that's fine." And he's like, "You want a beer? We got some beer here." So he like went and gave me a beer, and he's like, we'll be out of here. We'll be out of the way here. And like, just give us 5-10 minutes.
That is awesome.
I'm like, sure, no problem. Don't worry about it. And they finished up and pulled their vehicles out of the way, and I headed on out. So that was an unexpected coda to my evening there last night.
That's cool.
So yeah, that's the most interesting thing that's happened to me on this trip so far. How about you? What's going on up in Wisconsin that I've missed since I've been on the road here? Anything?
It's been hot.
Yeah.
But that's about it. You haven't missed much.
All right. I suppose you haven't had a chance to play any games or anything since I've been gone, because we talked about that already from Tuesday.
Yeah.
I'm kind of regretting not bringing it because I don't have much going on tonight. I should have brought a deck and then see if there was a game store within 15, 20 miles. I could have gone to it. I didn't think until it was too late. But maybe next time I'm traveling, I will do that again.
There you go. Good idea.
So if anybody out there in listener land has anything they want to reach out to us and talk about, how would you find us on social media, Max?
You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all by searching CMDR Central. You'll find most of our activity takes place on Twitter with our daily tweets, and then we reply a lot on there. YouTube, we've been getting better at replying at YouTube comments, so we apologize if we've missed some. And that's pretty much it. You can also head over to flipsidegaming.com and use promo code CMDR in all caps to get 10% off all orders, $10 or more. They do have their core 2020 singles available for pre-order, along with accessories like Dragon Shields and any other singles or sealed product you might need.
And I believe, speaking of core 2020, that will probably be the next couple of Monday shows we do is take a look at that set, I believe.
Yeah.
We have a few contests wrapping up, or at least coming to a near end. I guess they'll still be live when the show airs, but we're coming to the back end of them at least. One on Twitter and one for Patreon supporters.
Yeah, so the first one on Twitter is that Lorwyn starter deck Kithkin Militia from one of Dana's collections that he bought. All 60 cards are there. It just has been opened, so watch for that tweet and retweet it when you see it, and we'll announce that along with the Patreon drawing winner the second week of July.
Yes, indeed.
And for Patreon, we have a couple goals, and you can head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central to check out all of our reward tiers. If you are so kind, are able to help us out financially, it definitely helps us keep the lights on, buys us our new equipment, and buys me pants for when we go to video later this summer.
We will need those for sure.
Yes, so the contest over there is, the first one is our current stretch goal of once we have 200 active patron supporters and we hold it for about a month, we're going to do another live deck build episode, and we're going to be giving that deck away to a lucky patron supporter, and that deck will have a minimum budget of $400. So we're not going to build something crummy, but, it'll pack some power, I think.
Yeah, for sure. We'll put a nice deck out there for everybody.
Our June contest for Patreon is a Teferi Temporal Archmage Commander deck donated to the show by listener Michael Shea Woodward. It's a solid deck, has a lot of key pieces to make a some awesome combos happen if you are into that type of thing when you play EDH.
Yeah, there's a Chain Veil in there. There's a Snapcaster, I believe, in there. It's a solid deck. So thank you very much for that, Michael. We appreciate it.
Yeah. And, of course, as long as you support us, by the end of June, you'll be entered to win that Teferi deck. And, again, we'll announce that in the second week of July.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Max. So what are we doing today? We're doing a deck tech, right?
We're back for another Decks You Play.
All right. Man, Chris is missing out on all of these.
Yeah.
We'll have to make him do some by himself.
Ooh, can we just sit and watch and not say anything?
Right, yeah, we'll just sit here and judge him for the things he's missed. Like if he screws up something like a Massacre Girl or something.
Yep, because I can't read, apparently.
Well, you know what? Like, I knew you got it wrong, but I didn't want to say anything on the air and make you feel bad. So I just, agreed with you out of politeness, because I'm a friend.
The best one was our editor, Ken, late at night, messages us saying, yeah, you guys got that totally wrong.
He did. He caught it completely right away. I think a couple people on, was it YouTube or Twitter, messaged us about it too.
YouTube, Twitter, our Slack chat, yeah, everywhere.
And literally, as soon as Ken mentioned that you got Massacre go wrong, I was like, oh, it's not counters, is it? It's just -1 to end of turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I realized as soon as he said it, but.
Oh, well.
You know, even podcast professionals like ourselves occasionally make a mistake.
Yep. Maybe that's why Chris doesn't do these with us. And I'm sure we'll make one
here. Right, yeah, that's why Chris isn't here. We'll mess his game up.
Yep.
So let's take a look at Chris's Nicol Bolas the Betrayer deck. Or Nicol Bolas the Ravager Bolas Betrayal deck, I should say.
Yes.
You set out some questions every time you have questions about their meta and the goals of the deck, that kind of thing. Chris did not mess around when it came to answering these questions.
This looks like a midterm paper, to be quite honest.
Which is cool. I'm glad he put that much thought into it. I respect that.
Yeah, so we'll start off with what his meta is like. It's mostly a small play group of good friends. They've been playing since 95, but they just got into Commander about 3 years ago. Power level of their decks have been raising ever since. They have quite a few janky or themed decks, but there are the occasional Animar and Locust God and Edgar Markov decks in the rotation. They are okay with infinite combos, but they keep it to a 3-card combo minimum. And they all like to use alternative win cons. They limit their tutors to 2 per deck to make sure, no repetitive gameplay, and so far there aren't that many walkers in all the play groups, but that's starting to kind of go up a bit due to the War of the Spark stuff.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense, because we've kind of seen that as well.
Yep.
Said there's a lot of indestructible creatures running around. There's a lot of hexproof stuff, though the mass threaten effects this deck tends to run hit all opponents, and that seems to be pretty effective. So the wild card is when he travels for work and he can find an LGS with a Commander Knight, then the meta can be just anything. But he doesn't usually play this deck against strangers since he prefers something fun. And, a control-y, steal your stuff deck can sometimes go over poorly with people you don't know. So that makes sense.
Totally.
What is the goal of the deck? And his answer here is the deck was intended as his son's first Commander deck. His son's 9 years old, but he plays the game well enough. And it was inspired by a sealed game where he used active treason to steal Chris's best creatures and sacrificed it to Ravenous Harpy. Because his son pulled Nicol Bolas from a pack, they decided to build roughly that kind of same theory deck with Bolas. And the goal is to play kind of control that survives early while setting up sack outlets, and then use Bolas as disruption to set up for some big turns, middle or late game, and basically steal people's creatures to kind of use them against him.
Yeah. So he also says that he's playing a lot of the 3-mana threaten effects as possible. A lot of sack outlets for when he steals his opponent's stuff, he can get rid of it so it doesn't just go back to them. And he's added some more artifacts and enchantments just to have a balance throughout the deck. There's also a small Reanimator package, which has proven strong when it shows up and can be used as a win con or like an alternative win based instead of the overall theme of stealing people's stuff. He has some strict personal rules for this deck, which are great. We like to build with rules. Dana mentioned that on Monday's show.
I do.
So his first one is, as a deck building restriction, I have not included any other legendary creatures and or planeswalkers. It fits thematically, being that it's Bolas, and it makes choosing cards a lot easier. Of course, Bolas, other Bolas cards are okay if we can justify them. And if there is a really good non-Bolas fit, he'll try it out but can't guarantee it'll stay around. Traditional point removal is non-existent as a primary strategy, as the primary strategy of the threaten effects is already very good as it is.
Which makes sense. You don't need to go for the throat a creature when you can just take it and use it and then sacrifice it.
Right. His third rule, there are currently no control magic type effects. It feels off theme, but, he'll take our advice on that. Maybe we can offer a different point of view. Rule number 4 is there is no counter magic in the deck. There was at one time in an early build, but it just wasn't paying off with the theme. And then the final rule is there are no other discard effects in this deck besides Bolas.
And the counter magic one I get personally. I definitely have blue decks that have no counter magic. I actually like to make sure I have at least one of my blue decks without counter spells just to kind of force me to do something different with it. So I get that completely. And the discard stuff makes sense too. It's not necessarily that powerful in Commander for the most part, unless you are hitting everybody. And then that kind of tends to paint a bullseye on you that maybe you can't handle too. So
right.
That makes sense here as well. He's using Bolas kind of for a 1 or 2 off disruption and it's kind of as a threat, so I get that. What problems you're having with the deck? He said surviving to the mid-late game can be tricky. He added a couple of 3 CMC sweepers, but just hoping you draw into them isn't maybe the best idea. So the mana balance feels pretty good, and Blood Moon and such can be an issue, but that tends to be the case for most people.
Yeah.
He's wondering if a talisman or 2, especially the red ones, would be a good add, because he had to take a lot of damage early in some games. He's hoping that maybe some more consistent ramp could help him stabilize faster. He says he's not sure about the sweeper package, mainly because it's untested, and he's not certain about the overall count. Before, with mass sweepers, nothing will be left, so there's nothing to take with Bolas. That makes sense. So he's trying out cards like Last One Standing and Hour of Devastation to keep juicy targets alive, at least temporarily. And his budget limit for a single card upgrade is $50, which is
pretty solid.
That'll cover most things.
Yeah. Okay, Dana. Should we dive into the deck then?
Let's dig in.
So how about we start like we always do with the land base?
Yeah.
So Chris is running 36 lands. There's all the shocks are in here. He has a couple of the new Modern Horizon Canopy lands in here.
And the Prismatic Vista already. Yep, I like that.
The Prismatic Vista, all the shocks and fetches, and a couple sack outlets like Phyrexian Tower and High Market.
Yeah, for the most part, like for my first pass at a land base, it would look almost exactly like this, particularly with the Phyrexian Tower and the High Market and the rest of the lands. That looks pretty solid, I think.
Yep. Do you have any suggestions?
I don't really think so. I don't. Yeah, and I think his basic count is not bad. He mentioned being vulnerable to Blood Moon, but in a 3-color deck, he's got 15 basics.
That's solid in a 3-color deck.
Yeah, okay, could you run 18 or 20? Sure, but that's going to hurt you in other ways. I don't know. I don't know if I would change that. I get what he's saying, but maybe you just have to accept the fact that you're going to occasionally die to a Blood Moon, and in other games you're going to, do what you want successfully because you have a good diversified mana base too, and maybe that's just worth the trade-off. So I don't think he needs more.
Okay.
How about you? What do you think here?
I have quite a few suggestions here.
Okay.
Mainly based on the problems are based on his meta. So when we do these deck techs, that's kind of where I always start is.
Sure.
I look at the listeners' problems or what they're struggling with, and I kind of make my suggestions around that because I think, like I said on the last deck tech, sometimes solving the problems gets you to the victory.
Yeah.
So my first suggestions are add some sort of land destruction lands like a Ghost Quarter, a Strip Mine, or a Tectonic Edge, because knowing that this deck is all about the threaten effects and stealing stuff, Homeward Path is a thing.
Right, absolutely. And it is a meta call because we've had people tell us before, what is the deal with all these Homeward Paths? Because there's a lot of them in our meta.
Yes.
And clearly that's a thing that doesn't exist in some places.
Yep.
But even if it doesn't right now, if this is a deck you play a lot, I wouldn't be surprised to see people add them.
Exactly.
And you know what? There's always flipped over Growing Rights of Italmak or flipped over Search for Azcanta to deal with, best case, if not outright Gaia's Cradle, and if not Nykthos, and if not Cabal Coffers. Maybe that's a situation like we talked about, I think, last week, where if you're not getting burned by Blood Moon, maybe you don't need to worry about your basic count. Well, maybe it's the same thing here. If no one plays lands that are ever a problem, maybe you don't need a strip mine. But I feel like those scary big mana utility lands are so common nowadays. I just can't believe you don't see them once in a while.
Yep, I totally agree. So my next suggestions are, he mentioned there's a lot of hexproof in his meta.
Yeah.
Adding something like Arcane Lighthouse or Detection Tower will deal with the hexproof for the single targeted threat and effects.
Because there's a few of them here that do want just one target.
Yes. Especially the lower 3 CMC stuff.
Yeah. And what's nice about that over something like Glaring Spotlight is, you have to find a land slot for those cards, but they don't take up a spell slot necessarily.
Exactly. And both of them come in untapped, so it's not like you're taking a tempo hit in what is already maybe a slower deck.
Right.
And then my final suggestion is Boseiju, who shelters all.
To make your spells uncounterable.
So my instant reason was, it would really suck if your game plan is to win with Insurrection because you're about to steal 30 creatures and someone counterspells it.
Yeah.
I also have some spells later in the deck tech that Boseiju will help make sure you can cast.
All right. I like Boseiju there. I think the life loss does add up in a deck that doesn't have a lot of ways to gain life, so that would be the one downside about Boseiju. It's like, when we talk, you've talked enough times about your Hall of the Bandit Lord in Dromoka, but like Dromoka completely offsets the life loss to the point where it isn't a problem.
Right.
Whereas this one might be trickier.
Yeah.
So that's one thing to at least consider.
It is something to consider, but maybe it's just something you only use when needed.
Sure. Right.
Okay.
All right. What's next?
How about we move over to artifacts? All
right. 14 artifacts in the deck. Quite a few of them are sack outlets, or at least a couple of them are. You have Ajnav's Altar and Phyrexian Altar, Spawning Pit, and then Skull Clamp to a degree. Probably isn't actually sacrificing anything. It's just more working in conjunction with those sack outlets. There's Bolas the Citadel, which gives you some draw power, and a bunch of mana rocks. Chromatic Lantern, Commander Sphere, I think it's like 3 different signets, Felwar Stone, and Soul Ring, obviously, as well as Engineered Explosives is one of those sweepers that he can kind of tweak around, leaving the big fatties in play he wants to steal while taking care of other stuff.
Oh, that makes way more sense now.
Yeah.
I sat here for like half of my lunch hour going like, why is this in this deck? But now that makes sense.
I'm curious how Bolas Citadel works for him.
Oh, I was thinking the same thing.
And I guess maybe something like maybe he's treating it almost like a Sylvan Library, which I've mentioned before, where he's just taking 1 or 2 cards off it. Because, man, I feel like it would be very easy to lose a ton of life and have no way to get it back with this deck. There's a lot of fairly beefy spells here.
Yeah, I mean, his average CMC is 3.27? 3.17. So, I mean, it's a fairly low-costed deck in
That's true, yeah.
our realm. So, I mean, and the fact that I think he would rather just pay 3 life to cast, Goat Nap versus casting Goat Nap.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
I do think it's, like you said, it's for the Sylvan Library type effect. I don't think there's ever going to be a time where he's going to use the 10 non-land permanent feature.
Right, he's probably not chaining off 8 or 9 spells in a turn off it either.
No.
In I don't think you have to. If you're just like I said, use it like a Sylvan Library and spend 4 life to get 1 extra card per turn, that's a pretty reasonable rate of return for Sylvan Library, and it doesn't seem unreasonable here, plus you're not spending mana on the spell.
So, I'm really intrigued by Conjurer's Closet. I have never thought about using this card this way, because it says, exile target creature you control, and return it under your control, so...
It's one of the few that brings it back under your control.
Yeah, that's really cool, thinking that, okay, I'll steal it. End of turn, you stack the triggers, you blink it, and then it's a new object, so your act of treason or whatever doesn't have to make it sacrifice or go back to the owner.
And there's also a little bit of added synergy there with Bolas as well, where if you happen to have Bolas out and happen to have that out, you're like, maybe I'll just blink Bolas and, number one, give him vigilance by resetting him on tab, but number two, it's one more discard trigger.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like that card. This is a really sneakily useful card in this deck, I think.
Yep. So, Chris mentioned in the notes maybe adding a talisman or two. What are your thoughts on that, Dana?
I think he's got a pretty good ramp package. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rocks. I think.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I have decks that have 10, and I have decks that have 6. I don't think 8 is necessarily unreasonable, particularly because I don't know what I would tell him to cut. I would say this, generally speaking, I think he might have a few more sack outlets than I would run in a deck. I know it's good to have redundancy, but there's a lot of them here. And like Spawning Pit, I know you don't have to pay a cost, so you can sacrifice anything, but this also isn't a deck I don't think that, aside from the occasional, big insurrection kind of spell, I don't think you're very often sacrificing 3 or 4 creatures a turn to something. So that would be one. I think it could lose a few sack outlets. I think Spawning Pit might be one I would drop off. What were you going to say?
I think for the talismans themselves, it kind of all depends on how fast you want this deck to be. The signets, although still at 2 mana, require a mana to get float into it to make the 2. Right. Where at 2 mana, a talisman just makes you whatever color you want right away at the expense of a life. So it's
true.
Is it worth the 1 life early game, or is it worth not being able to use that 2 mana right when you cast it on turn 2? That's kind of what it comes down to, and it's probably a meta call.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree with you on Spawning Pit. It is a sack outlet. I think I'd rather see Mimic Vat in this spot.
Sure.
Just because it means you're going to exile the creature that you sacrifice to it versus just sacrificing your opponent's stuff.
Yeah.
And making a copy of, if you steal a Grave Titan and making, Mimic Vat copies of it, that seems really good.
Yeah.
And it's only 1 more mana to cast, I believe.
True.
And it is a couple more mana to use. So, I mean, it's overall a 3 mana increase in the curve when you look at the total payout, but I think overall it's probably the better card in comparison.
I would agree. There's one artifact I tend to like in these kind of decks, and that's Helm of Possession. It's an old one, I think, from Odyssey block. It's 4 mana, and it just says you may choose to not untap Helm of Possession during your untap step, and it has 2 tap, sacrifice a creature to gain control of target creature for as long as you control Helm of Possession and it remains tapped. So you spend 2 mana, sack a creature, gain control of someone else's creature. So you're already doing kind of that kind of effect anyway, and this kind of bakes a sack outlet into something that then steals a creature. So you spend your 2 mana, sack a creature you've already stolen to steal another creature.
Mm-hmm.
So it's double, versus like putting the counter on the Spawning Pit, to maybe make a golem or whatever it makes 3 turns down the road. In this case, you're just going to steal another thing, and then next turn, if you choose to, you can untap Helm of Possession, and the trigger goes in the stack to lose control of that creature. But while the trigger's in the stack, you sacrifice it to Helm of Possession, take another creature. It's not the most mana efficient thing in the world, but it gives you a reusable stealing stuff outlet.
Exactly.
So I'm a fan of that card. I think it should be in more decks in general, and I think this is a really good deck to run it.
For sure.
Other than that, I do think that I think he's got enough rocks, though. I kind of hemmed and hawed about it, but I don't know if the added speed is going to make a difference. I think there's some other things he can do here that will probably be more effective than just getting out Bolas slightly faster, because the problem you have in this kind of deck is if you go too fast and get to your position too quickly, there may be nothing for you to steal. So you've established yourself as a threat, and people know you're ready to start doing your thing, and they haven't already played their creatures. Where I think you want to lag a little bit, maybe.
Okay, yeah, I could agree with that.
But other than that, I like the artifact spread a lot.
Yeah, totally. Should we move on to enchantments? Because there's only 4 of them.
Certainly.
So we have Goblin Bombardment, another sacrifice outlet. Hazard's Favor, which is interesting. At the beginning of your combat, on your turn, you may have target creature you control get +2/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. If you do, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So it really partners well with all the threaten effects that typically give something haste. Now you're just hitting them for 2 more power than what you took from them. We have Necromancy. So this is part of that Reanimator package.
Yep.
I believe it's when you play Necromancy, choose target creature in any graveyard. So it's not just his, which is great. So I'll sack something that I just stole from you. Next turn, I'm going to take it. And then you gain control until Necromancy leaves the battlefield, essentially. Did I have that right?
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. And then the final one is Vampiric Rites, a single black, and you can pay 1 and a black to sacrifice a creature, gain a life, and draw a card. What are your thoughts?
Good sack outlet as well.
Yes.
So I mentioned this before, and I don't think, number one, I think you don't want to take out too many sack outlets. But again, I think Goblin Bombardment is one that works best when you are doing something on your board state that's generating a ton of creatures that you can sacrifice and like do a ridiculous amount of damage. Mm-hmm. And I don't think this deck ever does that. I think it's always a useful sack outlet for sure to have a 0-cost sack outlet available. But I think there's a bunch of them in the deck, and I think that one, I don't know if there's enough return on investment for it. I think if you're sacrificing 1 creature a turn, I think I would rather spend 2 mana to do so with a Vampiric Rites and draw a card than I would do it for free and do 1 damage.
Yes.
And I also don't know if Hazard's Favor is good enough.
Yep.
Like most of the threat effects already give the creature haste. So I don't know if spending 3 mana to give it +2/+0 and allowing it to be sacrificed when you again have 15 sacrifice outlets in this deck. I don't know if you need that here necessarily either. What I would consider running in both of those 2 slots would be Pyrohemia and Pestilence. They're going to kind of function. They're not really sack outlets, but they're going to allow you to dump mana into clearing the board at whatever rate you want to clear it. If you want to dump 6 mana into it and kill everything, assuming there's nothing at 7 power, you can do that. If you want to just sweep out 2 or 3 tokens and leave that 6/6 creature available so you can take it, you can do that too. I think they're both flexible, kind of semi-modular board wipes. He can reuse them next turn when like 3 or 4 more creatures come out, assuming he doesn't kill everything. And they kind of function to a degree like a sack outlet if you need them to as well. So I think those 2 cards, which are just one's red, one's black, and they're just a color shifted version of one another, I would consider at least one, if not both of those. How about you? What do you think here?
I went the completely opposite way.
Okay.
So I looked at this as he has a problem getting to the late game, the mid to late game, because other decks might be faster, they have more creatures, he can't steal everything all at once. So I went with more of a Pillow Fort enchantment package.
Is there a Koskin Falls in here?
There is not.
Oh, okay.
And that's the black propaganda, right?
It is, yeah.
I actually did not put that on my list because you have to sacrifice a creature at your upkeep in order to keep it. And he doesn't run a lot of creatures.
I think that one, I think you have to tap a creature, not sacrifice one.
Oh, okay, but still.
But still, right.
You don't want to tap Bolas, especially if he does flip him, which, question for you, Chris, how often do you actually transform Bolas to the Planeswalker side?
And I would guess not very often, because he did mention in his notes that he doesn't, because the mana costs are so prohibitive.
Yeah. So I decided to go with Propaganda because that's just a simple one. 2 more to attack you.
That makes sense.
War Tax is the same mana, 2 and a blue, but it's kind of modular, so you can pay X and a blue, and creatures can't attack you this turn unless their controller pays X for each attacking creature. So it's a mana sink. Yep. Or it's a political bargaining chip. Hey, don't swing at me because I'm just going to make you pay 8 mana per creature.
Right.
The next one I put on my list is Dissipation Field. It's 2 and 2 blue. Whenever a permanent deals damage to you, return it to its owner's hand. So you take 4 damage from a couple tokens, they just go away. You take 6 damage from a Grave Titan, they now have to recast that Grave Titan. It's a tempo swing, big time.
Yeah.
And then the final one is actually something I know you run personally, Dana, which would be No Mercy.
Yes, I'm a fan of that card.
So when something hits you, destroy it.
Those both make sense. It never even really occurred to me that he would use Pillow Fort as a way to make it to that later point in the game. I was just thinking of sweeping stuff out of the way. So they kind of we're kind of looking at two different ways to kind of achieve the same goal here.
Yeah, we definitely are. You're and I never thought of your way either. So I mean, this is why we're a team.
There we go. Absolutely.
And then my final enchantment, only because you just mentioned it a few minutes ago. He made the comment of, luck of the draw really shouldn't be a thing in this deck.
Right.
So put a Search for Azcanta in. You get early card selection. You can get the stuff out of your way into your bin if you don't want it, or if you do want to go more Reanimator for whatever reason. But if you do get Search for Azcanta to flip into Azcanta the Sunken Ruins, you can use that second ability to find those board wipes that you're looking for.
Man, I'll say this. I hate when someone casts Search for Azcanta, because it's one of those cards where I'm like, I just don't want to have to blow a removal spell on that, but I feel like you kind of have to. It just does. It's so much value.
Yep.
But it feels just like when someone casts a Mana Reflection, you're like, yep, that's gone. Whereas Search for Azcanta, you're like, oh, come on, you're going to make me remove that? But you kind of have to. It improves that draw selection and then flips over into a nice value mana sink too. It's such a good card.
Yeah. Okay. On to instants, because I don't have much for this.
Okay.
So he's running 12 instants. Active Aggression, so that's another threaten effect. Burnt Offering, sacrifice a creature to add that creature's casting cost in any combination of red or black mana to your mana pool, and that only costs a single black to cast. Interesting card. I've never heard of it before. We have Costly Plunder. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I see a lot of Burnt Offerings in, like, Ice Age bulk of Blood. Is the only, I've never seen it in a game, but I've seen a lot of them, like, when I buy a collection, and I'm like, here's my 2,000 count box of Ice Age bulk.
Oh, lovely. We have Costly Plunder. An additional cost to cast, sacrifice an artifact or a creature, you draw 2 cards. Makes sense when you're stealing stuff and you don't have a sack outlet on board. Sack it, draw a couple cards. Diabolical Intent, I believe is what this one is.
It is
it's the Amonkhet invocation, so I can't read it. But I think that is... Oh, yep, Diabolical Intent. So another instant speed, sack a creature, tutor a card. So this is the one of 2 tutors in the deck, I believe.
Yep.
Domineering Will, 3 and a blue. Target player gains control of up to 3 target non-attacking creatures until end of turn. Untap those creatures. They block this turn if able.
Yeah. That's actually a nice, efficient way to get a hold of multiple things.
Yeah. And... yeah, we'll come back to that. I don't know how he uses it, since it doesn't give them haste, so it's kind of defensive, I guess.
Well, and that's probably one of the ones he just uses his sack outlets for and makes them go away then.
Probably. We have Fling, another way to get rid of what he steals to deal damage to someone. Grab the Reins. It's an instant. You choose one until end of turn, gain control of target creature, it gains haste. Sacrifice the creature, grab the Reins, deals damage equal to that creature's power to target creature or player, but you can pay 2 and a red to entwine it for a total of, 7 mana?
Yep.
Ugh. Okay. We have Plunge into Darkness, 1 and a black, choose 1, sacrifice any number of creatures, then you gain 3 life for each sacrificed creature. Or you can pay X life, then look at the top X cards of your library, put one of those cards into your hand, and remove the rest from the game. And you can entwine it for a single black. So that's some card selection and some life gain, all built into one. We have Ray of Command, 3 and a blue, untap target creature and opponent controls, gain control of it until end of turn, and it gains haste, essentially. And then you lose control at the end of turn. Reigns of Power, 2 and 2 blue, untap all creatures you control and all creatures target opponent controls. You essentially swap until end of turn, and they gain haste. That is great in this deck, knowing that the creature count is pretty low.
Yeah, that's a very much a one-sided take all your creatures for the most part.
Yes. Then we have Sacrifice for a single black. Destroy one of your creatures without regenerating it and add to your mana Pool a number of black mana equal to creature's casting cost. So a little bit of a ramp spell right there.
Yeah, similar to that Burnt Offering spell.
The final one is Spinal Embrace. 3 blue, and a black. You can only play it during combat, and then untap target creature you don't control, and you gain control of it. It gains haste until end of turn. At end of turn, sacrifice it. If you do, gain life equal to its toughness.
So, again, I feel like, and you don't want to drop too many, but there's a bunch of sack outlets in here. Burnt Offering, Costly Plunder, Sacrifice does it, Spinal Embrace does it, Plunge into Darkness. So there's a bunch of them, and again, I just feel like there's probably more than you can reliably use. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you want to pull 10 out of this deck, but like I think the deck would function just fine running three less sack outlets overall.
Yeah.
I do understand Sacrifice and Burnt Offering though, because they let you, you've spent 4 mana gaining control of that creature or whatever it is, then you sacrifice it and get that mana back essentially. If not, maybe a little bit more even sometimes. So it does really offset the cost of doing business in this deck. It lets you still do something else in addition to your stuff. So I do kind of get those 2 cards. I'm not sure which one I would necessarily pull. Maybe Plunge into Darkness. I just don't know. But again, I think there's probably a few more than you can reliably use, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think Domineering Will is one that could probably come out just because it is one of those defensive spells versus offensive spells like the majority of the sorcery speed threat and effects are.
Yeah, although, it's a little narrow because you're only getting hold of non-attacking creatures and they do have to block, but I think he can probably get around it. That feels like a card that I would have to see in play to truly understand how well it worked.
Yep. Or if there was a haste enabler in this deck.
Right.
Casting it during your turn before combat, take attack with them.
Grab the Reins is one I wound up pulling out of my Crash deck. Mm-hmm. Because I was running it in there because it does have kind of a fling effect on it. What I discovered was the 4 mana was kind of felt like it was a lot to use the fling effect.
Yeah.
And I never had enough to entwine them, so I just felt like I was basically, for the most part, overpaying for the fling effect at 4 mana.
No, I totally get that. I think if I were to look at this deck and try to find spots for just the enchantments I just listed, I would start in this instant category.
Yeah, and I think Spinal Embrace is a neat card, but it's also 6 mana, and I think that's a lot to pay as well.
Yeah, and if you're in a meta where there's not big butts on creatures, you might only, spend 6 mana to gain 4 life. Maybe you steal something big and gain a bunch of life, but it's all dependent on the game state. Maybe it's just a dead card sometimes.
Yep. And I know he did mention that he doesn't run a lot of targeted removal because he has so much stuff that deals with creatures. Mm-hmm. I get that. However, you don't have any ways in this deck to deal with artifacts really or enchantments either. And I think a Chaos Warp in this slot here that can hit literally anything that's a problem would be worth dealing with, because you're going to have those games where like someone throws Lightning Greaves on their, whatever Archangel Avacyn or something, or big scary creature, and you can't do anything about it. And I think just being able to Chaos Warp away those Greaves or Chaos Warp away the Doubling Season that somebody else has played in their token deck or something, and then like, what are you going to steal a token when they're making 20 a turn? That doesn't do you any good either. So I would like to see at least maybe one more answer, and this is the slot I would put it in. I would take out something like Spinal Embrace, or maybe the Domineering Will, or the Grab the Reins or something, and put a Chaos Warp in there just to have one answer.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I'll have to ask him how that Domineering Will is working, and I'm really curious about the Sacrifice and the Burnt Offering, because I think they're not cards people play very much, but I could see them being worthwhile in this deck because it just kind of gives you a do-over on your mana base for the turn.
Yeah.
All right. What is next? Sorceries?
So yeah, let's talk sorceries. There are 28 of them, which I guess makes sense seeing that he's running almost every 3 mana threaten effect in the game.
And there's a lot of them in this stack.
I don't think we're going to go through all 28 sorceries unless there is something specific you want to talk about. Maybe we'll pull out like the board wipes in this deck. So
Yeah, we can note that there's probably like 18 different variations on Act of Treason or Mark of Mutiny or Threaten that all kind of do a very similar thing with some slight variation.
Yep. So let's talk about the ones that aren't those. So we have Discovery and Dispersal. I'm sorry, the card doesn't turn on Architect, so I'm literally turning my monitor.
Yeah, it's a minor draw effect and or a way to bounce. Each permanent returns the non-land permanent they control with the highest CMC to their hand, then discards a card.
Okay.
And my comment on that would be, I think both halves of that are mildly useful, and if I could fuse them together, I would like it quite a bit. But you can't, and so I don't think either half by itself is maybe good enough.
I tend to agree with that on most of the split cards from the Guilds of Ravnica block. And then
Beacon of Arrest, though, I do like it, because it lets you hit any graveyard and bring an artifact back as well. I think that's probably worth it for 5 mana for sure.
And it shuffles back into his library, so it's
you
a
can have a chance to see
repeatable
it again.
effect.
Yep.
Then we have Killing Wave, one of the board wipes here. X and a black for each creature. Its controller sacrifices it unless he or she pays X. I'm pretty sure this is the one where Sigarda just gets around it.
Yes. But if you're not playing a Sigarda deck, you maybe aren't too worried about that. I think it's useful for a situation where you want people to keep their big beater creatures and get rid of the small ones. But again, I think Pestilence or Parahemi would do the same thing, maybe more reliably, because it doesn't give them an option to pay the mana. And you can just say, I want all the small stuff gone.
Yep. As we keep moving through, we have Notion Rain, just a solid card filtering and card draw spell. Painful Truce, another great card draw spell with Converge, so you're probably going to draw 3 and lose 3 if you have all 3 colors on the board. Reanimate, part of that Reanimator package. What else? We have Spark Harvest. This is interesting. So Spark Harvest is from War of the Spark. It's a single black. An additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice the creature, or pay 3 and a black. And it destroys the target creature or planeswalker. So maybe this is just for an extra value. You're going to sacrifice what you steal, pay a black, and then destroy something else. You know, targeted removal isn't great in this, isn't very high in this deck, like he said in his notes, but I think this just plays well into both strategies.
Yeah, and this is another one I would consider if I was looking to replace something. I would just replace, use a Chaos Warp here to deal with as a removal that deals with any removal and not have to worry about sacrificing a thing. So this is one of the ones I would consider to remove for Chaos Warp as well.
Yep. Thud is in the deck. It's just a sorcery speed fling, essentially. Torment to Hailfire.
Yeah.
Game's got to end.
It just wins games sometimes.
You know it. It's great.
And in addition to the small sweepers, to the small like threaten / treason effects, there's a couple big sweeper like ones like Insurrection and Mob Rule and Mass Mutiny. They'll let you gain control of multiple things for a turn, if not all the things in Insurrection's case. And those can just win you games too. So they do what the deck wants to do already, in addition to, at certain points, they're probably just going to be a win condition card.
Yep. And then the final sweeper would be Toxic Deluge, which plays great into the I want to keep the big stuff and get rid of the little stuff strategy.
Yeah.
So do you have any suggestions in the sorcery slots?
No, like I don't know. I think there might be more threaten effects than you need.
I agree with that.
Because I ran a similar deck years ago with Brian Stoutarm.
Oh, that's right.
And I had a lot of these in there. But there were times when I just, I don't need 3 of these in my hand. And I would just keep drawing them because I was running like 25 of them or so. And what I wanted was a draw spell. And of course I was in Boros, so there was no such thing. But in this deck, you do have the options. Like you're playing black and blue as well. So there's a chance you could, I think, very easily pull out 1 or 2 of these and slot in a Read the Bones or a Night's Whisper or a Ponder or a Light Up the Stage or something. and just put a couple cards in your hand consistently versus having maybe too many threaten effects and not enough things that are worth threatening.
Yeah, I think it's, you got to find that perfect ratio of,
Yes.
how many of these in your hand do you need when there's no creatures on the board? You're sitting there stalled out.
And it's kind of a similar thing. I had to find that balance with my Crash deck. In that case, it's a balance of how many fling effects do I want in this deck versus things that make my creatures big enough to want to fling. In this case, it's how many threaten effects do I want and how many sacrifice outlets do I want versus things that I can use otherwise to get to that point in the game. So like finding that balance can be tricky, but I think at this point it's erring a little bit too much on the side of maybe too many sack outlets and maybe too many threaten effects by a couple of each of those two categories.
Yeah, totally.
And generally kind of my rule of thumb is if you take out a card and replace it with a draw spell, that's almost never the wrong thing to do.
Says the guy who would rather die by decking himself than anything.
Right. And I will fully admit that might just be me.
Awesome.
So how about you? Anything special here from you?
I have 2 sorceries that I think are going to go great in this deck. The first being Mizzix's Mastery.
Ugh. I was just discussing that card with somebody today.
So for those who don't know, let me pull it up quick. So Mizzix's Mastery is 3 in a red for a sorcery. Exile target card that's an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. For each card exiled this way, copy it, and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Exile Mizzix's Mastery. Well, it also has Overload for 5 and triple red.
So worst case scenario, you're paying like 1 extra mana to make it a copy of the best threaten effect in your graveyard. So like worst case, you can treat it as a 4 mana threaten effect.
Yep.
But turn 9 or 10 or 12 or whatever it is, you can turn it into 6 threaten effects.
Exactly. I just kind of thought about it as that's a 4 mana insurrection.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
So if the first
really
insurrection didn't win you the game, the second one will. Or even 9 mana to replay 3 or 4 threaten effects.
And he's got 40 instant sorceries in this deck.
Yes, so it's always going to hit something.
Yeah, in not only is that useful, again, there are situations where that's maybe just a win condition card.
Yep.
You just generate so much value and take so much stuff that you just like it's a situation where even if you don't have Insurrection in your graveyard, when you cast 5 different threaten effects off it, it's the equivalent of Insurrection.
Yep.
So, no, that's a really good call here. I was just discussing that to somebody today, like how, there's just a lot of decks where that's a good card and people don't run it because they don't really think, hey, how great would it be to copy these 14 ramp spells in my graveyard or whatever.
Oh, gross.
Yeah.
I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah, because I was discussing, I probably should put it in my Mina and Den deck.
Oh, for sure. Okay, so my next one pairs well with Mizzix's Mastery, and that is Epic Experiment. So
The red-blue one, right?
Yep, so it's X, red and a blue. Exile the top X cards of your library. For each instant and sorcery card with converted mana cost X or less among them, you may cast those cards without paying its mana's cost. Then any cards that were exiled that weren't cast go into your graveyard. So for 5 mana total, so 3 to the X and 2 for the red-blue, you look at your top 3 cards, you just found 2 threaten effects. You get to do it for free. If you put 5 into X, now you found, 4 threaten effects. It's very modular to the fact that there are 10 creatures on the board. I have 12 mana. Let's see if I can find every threaten effect in my deck.
I like it.
Also, if you don't pay enough to maybe cast Insurrection for free, Insurrection goes to the bin and then you Mizzix's Mastery it back.
Right, exactly. Right.
Or there's a creature coming up that we'll talk about.
Okay.
So those are my 2 suggestions for the sorceries, just because I think it helps with the card selection, especially with those 3 mana sweepers. You Experimental Frenzy into a Toxic Deluge, you Experimental Frenzy into the Last One Standing. Anything like that just helps find those cards faster, and that seems like one of his problems.
All right. So how about those creatures?
All 5 of them. Woo!
Hey, I've got a couple decks that are running around that level, so I get it.
Do you?
And they're all
Talrand.
Yeah. And they're all kind of sack outlet kind of things. Like there's Disciple of Bolas. When it comes into play, you sacrifice a creature and gain life and draw cards equal to that creature's power. Makes sense in this deck. Dracoplasm, which is an old card from, I think, Tempest.
Yes.
It's 2 mana for a star. It has flying, and when it comes into play, sacrifice any number of creatures, and it comes into play with power equal to the total power of the sacrificed creatures, and toughness equal to the total toughness of those creatures. And it has fire breathing. So if you happen to have 2 or 3 things that you've taken with an insurrection or whatever, that's a pretty efficient way to cast a creature that turns into a 20-26 or something, and sacrifices the things you took.
Yep.
There's Greater Gargadon, which is a pretty well-known sack outlet. It has to spend 10 for a red, and it's just a non-interactable sack outlet that costs you nothing to activate. And whenever you sacrifice something to it, you remove a time counter from it, and it will eventually come into play, but pretty often Greater Gargadons just sit there being a perfect, untouchable sack outlet until the game is out of control.
Very true.
There's Snapcaster Mage, which is a pretty famous card. Everyone knows what that does. Returns an instant or sorcery spell, or gives a flashback, I should say, from your graveyard on a body. And then there's Viscera Seer, which is also a pretty well-known combo engine. Lets you sacrifice a creature to scry 1. What do you think here, Max?
That's not a lot of creatures, but they all do what he wants them to do.
Yeah.
I have a few suggestions, though.
Shoot.
So the first one, we're going to start with my 2 suggestions that break the no other legendary creature rule.
Okay.
So my first one plays into the Pillow Fort theme I baked into the enchantment package I recommended, and that's Kazul, Tyrant of Jund. And he says whenever an opponent attacks you, they have to pay 3 or you make a 3/3.
Yep.
So whenever a creature an opponent controls, so they got to pay 3 mana for everyone that attacks you, or you just make blockers. Or you make blockers that survive and you can sacrifice to something, My second legendary creature would be Lord of Tressorhorn.
Yeah.
So Lord of Tressorhorn comes all the way back from Alliances. He costs 1 and Grixis. He's a 10/4. But he has these fun words saying when he enters the battlefield, you lose 2 life, sacrifice 2 creatures, and target opponent draws 2 cards, but you can regenerate them for a single black mana. So my thought process was you cast Insurrection. Let's say you can kill 2 of the 3 opponents you have.
Right.
You cast Lord of Tressorhorn if you have the mana available. You sacrifice the stuff of the player that's still in the game. They get to draw a couple cards, and unless their removal says can't be regenerated, or exile, I guess, you have a 10/4 beater on the battlefield for the rest of the game.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
But again, those break the no other legendary
Right.
creature card rule, so I'm just throwing them out there as in case you want to maybe work some wiggle room, because rules are meant to be broken.
They are indeed.
But
I myself had a legendary creature suggestion as well.
okay.
Or sorry, it's not a legendary creature, it's just a big beater creature, and that would be Sepulchral Primordial.
Yeah.
That lets you, and it doesn't threaten a thing in play, but it'll let you gain control of a creature in each player's graveyard. But you just keep them. It's not like a till end of turn effect or anything. Primordial is really, really good, and you've got a few ways to recur things in the stack as well, and I think it just gives you one more route to get creatures, and you're not necessarily reliant on them being in play. I think it's the ability to diversify a touch more and take things from graveyards would be useful here.
Yep. I definitely agree with that. I have a non-legendary creature recommendation as well.
What's that?
That's Torrential Gearhulk. So it's a little more expensive than Snapcaster, 4 double blue for a 5/6, but it has flash. And then when he enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. So, you can recast any of your, that Chaos Warp if you put it in. You can recast Burnt Offering if you really need to, if you already have something else on the field, or even Spinal Embrace. It's a way to recast those cards and get some extra value out of them.
You pay more for it, but you're not having to pay the cost of the spell you cast.
Right, and you get a 5/6 beater on the battlefield.
Right, which again, it lets you survive a little bit longer to have that as a blocker, or it can be a closer in some games too if you need to get a little bit of damage through.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's everything.
That is everything. We went through the entire deck.
Whew.
We're getting good at this.
Man, Bolas, you are a savage monster.
I think that was the point, right?
Yeah, I think so.
He should have won. He should have won.
Hubris, his own arrogance, was his undoing. So, I think my final kind of summary here, I mentioned it before, but I'll say it again. I think there's probably slightly more sack outlets than he needs. And maybe slightly more threat and effects. I think you could very easily replace those with, if he wants ramp, he can try ramp. I think I would probably go with draw myself. A little bit of removal might work there as well, but I like draw. I think the Pillow Fort strategy makes sense. So does the Pyrrhemia Pestilence effects. I think those will help him out as well. But it's a pretty tight list. Like, I like the deck. I can see absolutely what decks it would cause me. Like, my Crush deck would struggle mightily with this, because anytime I make a creature big, it's just going to get stolen and sacrificed. Yeah,
totally. I guess, in my opinion, this was a really cool, different take on a threaten steal type deck, because you typically, at least in our area, we see this on top of Marchesa of the Black Rose.
Yeah, Marchesa or Bryon occasionally.
Or Bryon. So it was really cool to see a different Grixis commander leading that type of strategy.
Yeah, and I do like Bolas. I mean, hey, this is the most easily playable Bolas as a commander compared to the 14 mana one from Legends.
Exactly.
So, very cool deck, Chris.
Yes.
And thank you very much for supporting us on Patreon.
Yes, thank you so much, Chris. And he actually donated a nice wooden deck box that we'll be giving away with our 200 patron stretch goal deck build off.
Oh, nice. Well, excellent. What a generous supporter.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right. I think that is going to wrap it up for us for this week. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod. Our show is edited by Ken Peddle. You can find him on Twitter at LOAD3R. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR_Max. You can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. And we'll be back on Monday with, I believe, the first of our Core Set 2020 reviews. Until then, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
And this was Commander Central.